Dream 1 2 level design was so devious sometimes, like there's Iceberg Stage 4, that Rainbow Drop was torture, Cloudy Park Stage 2, that one's just confusing, Red Canyon Stage 5, oh.
Yo, what up, Pekachow Squad? Today we're going to be doing another ridiculously long Kirby review video, but this time, the ridiculously long Kirby review video is going to be a little different. Yes, that's right, I am slightly varying up the content I have been pushing out a ton recently. Seriously, I need to do something a little different for the next one. I'm still thinking. But, back on topic, if you saw the wonderful Kirby's Dream Display presentation, which was essentially just a Kirby content creator Nintendo Direct hosted by my good friend and a certified epic gamer, Savi the Gamer, you would know that I have been cooking something lately. Or if you just saw me post about it on some other media, because, you know, don't want to leave you guys out of the loop, but you should definitely check out Dream Display. You guys gotta watch it. It is just such a peak video. Everyone put in so much effort in order to make it so damn peak, and there's plenty of other stuff you guys have time to get excited for by watching that presentation, because not everything has come out yet, and there's just tons of additional spice, which makes it just wonderful. It's the best Nintendo Direct we've ever had. But back to my Dark Matter Trilogy Retrospective, if you want a quick little explanation as to why I'm even doing this, because you haven't seen Dream Display, even though you absolutely need to watch it after this video, I demand you do that. To summarize, I have a lot of things to say about all of these games. Some of them are especially great, amazing Kirby games that seem to get slept on by the general community. They don't really get the love and respect I think they deserve. Kind of underrated Kirby games, if you ask me. Dream 1, 3, and 64 are such amazing games. I love them both so much, and I just need to give these games the attention and love they deserve. But in order to do that, we need to get through Dreamland 2 first, and Dreamland 2 is quite the interesting game. It's always been a really interesting game for me, ever since I first played it back in Kirby's Dream Collection all those years ago. So, what exactly do I mean by that? Well, let's find out. Is Kirby's Dreamland 2 the most peak, underrated, slept-on Kirby masterpiece of all time, besides, of course, Kirby Slide, but it's not fair to compare any games to that. It is simply just a game of the highest caliber, simply godlike. Or is it just absolute garbage? Is there a reason why everyone seems to just not really care too much about this game? Is there a reason why 10,000 copies of Kirby's Dreamland 2 were found in a Japanese landfill back in 1996? Well, let's find out, but in order to truly make this retrospective the absolute best it can be, I want to cover all aspects of these three games, including some external aspects like development and marketing. So, in order to do that, let's rewind the clock back to 1995, or 1994. I don't know if the game really started development in 1995. If so, damn, that was a rush job, but it's unrealistic to simply just assume that. So, 1994 at some point, I guess, and, well, I couldn't really find much about Dream 1 2's development.
However, I do happen to know a few things about the development of Kirby's Dream 1 2, including the crazy fact that Shinichi Shimomura was the game's director.
Pretty obvious stuff, considering the Dark Matter Trilogy is known for being his main contribution to the Kirby franchise and all directed by him, but this was his first real directorial debut for a Kirby game, so that makes it a pretty important landmark in the Kirby series history. There was also the idea of having Kirby ride tanks or transform into vehicles before the animal friends were decided on. It was chosen to be animals rather than like a tank or something because it would simply just fit better with the world of Kirby, which is cool, although I do kind of wish we could get Kirby like driving a real tank. Pretty sad, but pretty cool. These guys are all wonderful. Wait, hold on, this just dawned on me now. Do you think that those animations from Rainbow Curse when Kirby's about to transform, where he becomes an animal friend real quick before becoming his vehicle transformation, are like a deep cut reference? It's like, oh hey, look, he's an animal friend, now he's a tank. Like, you know how Rick was gonna be a fucking tank in Kirby's Dreamland 2 before? You know that? Oh, look, he becomes Rick, then he becomes a tank. This is what happens when the Kirby brain rot sets in a little too hard, but then again, I am the Kirby Iceberg guy, ayo! And there's also the fact that Kirby's Dreamland 2 was developed with the Super Game Boy in mind, with things like this screen with the rainbow being perfectly designed to encapsulate the max color palette of the Super Game Boy, and just combine it into this one picture, which is like 3 colors. Truly the most impressive hardware of all time. Now, if only I decided to record all this footage with like a Super Game Boy filter or something, rather than just the original Game Boy's super impressive and totally raw color scheme of black and green. Look, I tried, alright? I wasn't about to just go replay this entire damn game with a Super Game Boy filter applied just to make this footage look a little more appealing. I love you guys. I'll do so much for you guys and making my videos the best they can be on this channel, but no human being should need to suffer through playing Kirby's Dream Land 2 2 whole consecutive times for footage. Oh, and Kirby's Dream Land 2 is also a video game. It was released for the Nintendo Game Boy back in 1995, at the earliest, in Japan. It is a sequel to Kirby's Dream... Okay, so here's a little fun fact. Did you know that Kirby's Dream Land 2 is one of, like, the 8 or so Kirby games to have sold over 2 million copies? It's pretty crazy and kind of sad considering that very few Kirby games have sold this well, and also that Dream Land 2 is one of them.
Obviously, Kirby's Dream Land 2 must have had some pretty killer marketing to have sold that well, especially in Japan, where I think about, like, half of the sales are from, and to an extent, all of that is true. As per usual, Japan gets a ton of cool stuff to coincide with the new Kirby release, all sorts of little toys like these little Keshi, these little rubber figures that came with candy depicting all sorts of different characters from the game, even the random enemies and mid-bosses, and they are so cool. I love these guys. I even own a few of them myself. That isn't everything though, because there was tons more merch for this game, including these plushes which depict Kirby and his animal friends, to these little Kirby animal friend wind-ups, to a whole plethora of other stuff I'm not even going to begin to get into. And by out of Japan Kirby standards, other regions got it quite well too, such as over here in America, we got this Kirby's Dream Land 2 Nintendo Power magazine, where you can clearly see it right on the front, giving the game that little boost in popularity it probably needed. And we also got the absolutely legendary commercial where Kirby and his animal friends decide to just hit up this little biker joint and just start killing a bunch of them. Wow, what an accurate depiction of the character. They sure did their research. So yeah, overall, the marketing was not horrible, especially in Japan. It was really good in Japan. But over here, or just really anywhere outside of Japan, it was a little lacking. But it was overseas Kirby marketing. What are you really gonna do? But as I said before, Japan got it super good on this one, even if it wasn't as good as a game like Kirby's Adventure. I'm sure there's some kid out there whose first memory of Kirby is buying a Kirby Keshi box from like a store or something. I don't know any Japanese general stores, but probably just picking that up, getting a little Ifriti, and putting the Ifriti in his mouth, just absolutely chewing that guy up, thinking he was the candy, and winding up in the ER, where he would later receive a Kirby's Dream Land 2 game in compensation for winding up in the hospital, which, I'm sorry. I'm really sorry about that theoretical kid. Let's also not forget that Kirby's Dream Land 2 was a sequel to Kirby's Dream Land, which was the best-selling Kirby game up until Forgotten Land, and like one of the 2 to have surpassed 5 million copies, which is ridiculous. You never hear anyone talk about Kirby's Dream Land that much. It's mostly like, oh, this is the first Kirby game. It started the series. You don't hear anyone like, I'm the biggest Kirby's Dream Land fan. You never hear anything like that. How did this game sell 5 million copies? Kirby's Dream Land 2 sure did need that little extra boost in popularity, though, because I don't think anyone would have bought this game if they knew it was going to be complete garbage. Oh, sorry. I was just thinking about Dream Land 2 again. We haven't even talked about the actual game, and I'm already being so mean to this poor game. Is any of this really deserved? Well, let's actually talk about Kirby's Dream Land 2, the game, and find out. And we'll truly be able to see why Kirby's Dream Land 2 took the kids, but then I took them back. But then Kirby's Dream Land 2 wanted to get together, but I didn't really want any of that. And eventually I did want it, so we got back together. But then we broke up, but then Kirby's Dream Land 2 came crying back. Alright, so let's start Kirby's Dream Land 2 for real by setting the scene. What exactly is this game about, and what silly misadventures are Kirby and friends getting up to this time? Well, the basic story of the game is all kicked off by this guy, Dark Matter, who has an absolutely killer design in his Dark Matter blade form. Jesus, this design just goes so hard. But being a Kirby villain, he wants to shroud the world in darkness, and in order to do that, he has stolen the rainbow bridges from the Rainbow Islands, which basically just connect this whole series of islands, and yeah, he's going off to shroud the world in darkness. He's also taken control of DDD, which is the series first, and will go on to become a super common recurring theme in the series going forward. Like, seriously, this guy cannot catch a break. And in order to stop Dark Matter and save the Rainbow Islands, Kirby and his brand new animal friends set out to collect the rainbow drops to reassemble the Rainbow Sword in order to defeat Dark Matter and put an end to this really cool looking individual. Kirby's Dream Land 2 has a really simple story, but I think that's more to its benefit than anything else. It gives you just the push you need to want to beat the game and defeat Dark Matter, while also expanding the Kirby mythos and giving us some more stuff that will be elaborated on later in the series. One of those things, though, is not the Rainbow Islands. Like, seriously, what even are these? Just kind of show up in Kirby's Dream Land 2 and we never see them again. I know someone's gonna point out that one Kirby novel where I think they go to the Rainbow Islands, but like... One, the novels aren't exactly canon, so do take anything this book has to say with a grain of non-canonical salt. And 2, I haven't read a Kirby novel since like the 5th one. I just kind of stopped reading them. They weren't bad. I really like the first one and the one where Meta Knight like saves that candy princess, I think. And I think the characterization of the characters is pretty good and the art's pretty good and stuff. I just kind of stopped reading them. I just kind of forgot. Although I should probably get back on that Kirby novel grind. That'll be my homework after this video. Sorry for being a fake fan. I have an important Pekachow from the future update. I'm lying. I'm actually just going to be playing Mega Man Battle Network 2. Give me like 5.5 full-ass RPGs worth of time, and then I'll probably go read the Kirby novels, but you gotta give me some time on that. Battle Network calls. And also, the single dark matter we see in this game is also pretty interesting as well. Compared to the more hive mind-like dark matter we go on to see later, where they're just kind of pawns of Zero, this one seems to be acting more independently. We never see another dark matter take on this dark matter blade form, so maybe it's like a sign of authority or something, maybe a higher ranking dark matter. Who really knows? As for Kirby's Dream Land 2's actual gameplay, it works very well. It's pretty similar to Kirby's Dreamland, and you can do all the usual Kirby stuff. You know, we got the D-pad to move around, A to jump, B to inhale or attack, down to crouch, up to hover, all that stuff. And it works just about as well as in the first game. I do have one gripe with Kirby's moveset in Dream Land 2 though, and that is the lack of any real speedy movement options like a dash or a slide. It really does leave the game feeling a little slower compared to its brethren, and there are some situations where something like that would really help out a ton, and it especially stings knowing that Kirby's Adventure proved that those things can work really well in a Kirby game. Besides that really restrictive element though, there's nothing really wrong with Kirby's Dream Land 2's controls. Sure, they're not the perfect epitome of what every Kirby game should aspire to control like, but they do work very well for the game itself, and I don't really have any other issues. There's also a few little mechanics I want to talk about in Kirby's Dream Land 2. Some are just like completely original in this game, and some were just carried over from Kirby's Adventure. But the first one I want to talk about is getting hit, and how you lose an ability star every time that happens. Hooray! This was always kind of a nuisance in Kirby games. I was never too big of a fan of this mechanic. I want to keep my ability for more than just like a single hit. I know you can just go get it back, but still, it can get kind of annoying and break up the pace sometimes. But in Dream Land 2, I think it's especially bad considering the small screen size, making it a little easier to get hit. It's not like the worst thing in the world. It's not a deal breaker or anything. I don't have like too much of an issue with it, but I would just prefer for it not to be in this game. Speaking of ability stars, when you spit a star bullet out at an ability star that is dropped, you can actually destroy it. I don't know why this happens, but I really do not like this. It is pretty annoying, especially when you're just rushing back to get an ability star and accidentally wind up firing a star bullet its way or something. It's not something that happens too often, but it can be a real pain in the ass when it does. To end this mechanic talk on a slightly more positive note though, I do really like how Dream Land 2 carried over Kirby's Adventure's mechanic of being able to cram 2 or more star bullets or enemies into Kirby's gullet to make a bigger star bullet for him to use. I know it's nothing too special considering that this is a staple of the Kirby franchise, but this was like the second game to feature that, and it was pretty big, especially considering the original Kirby's Dream Land did not have this feature. It makes landing attacks as the basic Kirby a lot easier to do, and it's just a really fun mechanic I always really enjoyed. On his adventure, Kirby will also encounter various different items, including healing items like the Pep Brew, which restores a few points of Kirby's health, and the Maxim Tomato, which restores all 6 1-ups, which give Kirby an extra life, and the Point Stars, which make their debut in this game. Point stars are treated as little secret items you can find all across stages. Sometimes they're hidden in star blocks, sometimes they're just kind of lying around in certain areas, like little secret areas, and when Kirby collects 7, he can get an extra life. As 7 is a super low number, even compared to other games in the Dark Matter Trilogy, which don't have it as high as 100 like in the modern titles, which makes it a really easy way to farm lives in this game. And interestingly enough, Dream Land 2 is also like the only mainline Kirby game, if I recall correctly, to not feature the invincibility candy. It's not really too big of an issue, it's just kind of a strange thing I noticed while playing through the game again. And I guess I'll also just talk about the goal game here. It's like Kirby's Adventure's goal game, but not good. Like, I don't even know what the timing is supposed to be on this one. I swear I hit it at its lowest point, and it feels like it just refuses to work. I have no idea how I even managed to hit this at the top, but I do like the little detail of having Kirby do a full Kirby dance at the top, and the more you go down, the less the Kirby dance is complete, leading to like a really, really short and brief lowest point dance. Now, I'm sure literally everyone watching this video is wondering, why have I not talked about the copy abilities yet? And we'll get to that in just a moment. There's a certain something I want to talk about with them in a second. But how do they work with base Kirby? well, they work fine enough. They're just your basic one-button abilities, nothing wrong with that. Although some of them do have a little less depth than they did in Kirby's Adventure, like Parasol, but it's super disappointing to see the number of like 24 from Kirby's Adventure with the standard abilities has been trimmed down to 7. That is so sad. I can't believe they would trim down the numbers so bad. Man, that really, really sucks. The ability concept is so good in this game, even if some of them aren't exactly like hits, but that's more of an ability-specific thing. Most of them do work pretty fine. But come on, you can't just remove all the copy abilities. And to that I say, meet the animal friends, the main new gimmick of Kirby's Dream Land 2. And they're not just gimmicks, they're little animals, because, you know, cool, cute little animals. I love these guys! Yes, that's right. This game gives us the introduction of Rick, Koo, and Kine, who resemble a hamster, an owl, and a fish respectively. Not my words, I'm just reading the Nintendo Switch Online description. And besides just being wonderful, cute little animals who I love dearly, they're also an amazing gameplay mechanic and easily the best thing to come from this game. Not only do these guys help Kirby by making the land, sky, and sea, respectively, even easier to traverse thanks to their own unique abilities, they also have their own unique way of handling each of the game's 7 base copy abilities, which when you add all of these as separate abilities, because, well, they practically are, you get a grand total of 28 different standard copy abilities, which is even more than Kirby's Adventure had. Sure, they aren't exactly all hits, and some of them are kind of really, really similar to each other, but this was such a genius way to handle back the cutting of abilities for the Game Boy. I just love this idea so much, and it's such a good way to repurpose those abilities in ways that kind of freshen up the game, and there's a huge experimental aspect with this game where you can just bring an animal friend and a certain ability together, and there's like so many different results. It's so fun to just toy around with. Another especially cool thing with the animal friend abilities is that some of their combination abilities are actually just abilities from Kirby's Adventure that didn't make the cut. Now this is just a genius way to bring some of those classics back that weren't able to make it into this game without needing to design a whole new set of animal friend abilities around a, let's say, beam. Experimentation is probably the thing that defines the Dark Matter Trilogy the most for me. All 3 of these games have a ton of different ways to just kind of mess around with abilities, whether it's 64's ability mixing or Dreamland 2 and 3's animal friends and all the different ability combinations you can have going on there. Experimentation is one of my favorite aspects of Kirby games. I love the amount of options you're given with all the different copy abilities and all the different ways to use them. It's such an amazing feature of the Kirby series, and the Dark Matter Trilogy, even Dreamland 2, just takes it to a whole new level. Sure, Dreamland 2's ability mixing isn't exactly as in-depth as 64 or Dreamland 3, but it is still really damn good, and my favorite thing about this game, and definitely the best thing to have come from it. I'll talk more about this in my Dreamland 3 video because I think that the animal friends were implemented even better in that game, but I think the animal friends are just the absolute best gimmick to have ever been featured in a Kirby game, between the insane experimental aspect that comes with them and the fact that they're just cute little animals and just some amazing characters in the Kirby universe because they're just so wonderful. I love these guys so much, and it gives them the edge over Kirby 64's ability mixing, which I also do love very much. Don't get it twisted though, I do really love 64's ability mixing. I should probably stop talking about this though, but super charming stuff, although they're in a cute animal, so that's kind of a problem. I also really love the Robobot armor. I know it's sounding like I'm kind of like dissing the Robobot armor by just not mentioning it while talking about all these amazing Kirby gimmicks, but I do love it. Best modern Kirby gimmick, best second to all of these. Alright, so let's back up. This is a Dreamland 2 video, not a Robobot video or anything. That will probably come later. But back to Dreamland 2. The animal friends have a few unique mechanics going on with them, exclusive to Dreamland 2, like how they are only found in bags when you defeat mid-bosses, or sometimes you just have to defeat, like, an enemy, or... Oh no! The spark block, no way! These are truly some of the most formidable mid-bosses in history. I don't know how anyone was even able to defeat this terrifying spark block in this room. He's just standing there, menacingly. But when you do somehow manage to defeat them, the little bag hanging at the top of the ceiling drops and your little animal friend pops out, who doesn't restore your health despite what it looks like, but rather fills up an entirely new health bar exclusive to that animal friend. So once that health bar depletes, your animal friend is gone, and you're back to whatever amount of health you had before that. So pick one up with 1 health, your animal friend runs out of health, you're back at 1 health, just hope you don't die. It's a nice little mechanic, and I guess it is better than losing a life, even if it's pretty sad to see your little animal friend go. Gooey also shows up in these bags if you're riding an animal friend that would pop out of the bag otherwise, and he doesn't really do much in this game. We don't really know about his Dark Matter origins yet. He's just kind of there. He's just in these bags for some reason, and when you pick him up, he restores a little bit of your health. I would have appreciated if he restored a little bit more, but, you know,
He's gooey. I love gooey. Dream 1 2 has some really, really good gameplay. Sure, there's some strange quirks and some things I would just prefer to not be in the game, but the basic Kirby gameplay is nice, and the animal friends are just the absolutely amazing, wonderful thing that ties the game together. They're just this perfect little gimmick, and while they aren't exactly at their peak yet, they are super damn good and the best thing to come from the game. So, how about the presentation of Dream 1 2? Well, Dream 1 2's presentation was always like a really, really nice looking presentation, but never one that impressed me too much. I think my biggest gripe with the presentation comes from the fact that so many of the game's areas look visually similar, and I know the main cause of this is because of the Game Boy and its color limitations, but even on the Super Game Boy, the areas don't feel too distinct besides each one getting its own unique color palette. It's a Game Boy game. The presentation has to be pretty restrictive running on that little gray brick, but, you know, it's just presentation that never really wowed me. It's a step above Kirby's Dream Land, but it's not really, like, top tier. Did always really like some of the more unique looking platforms though, like these ones in Cloudy Park or this one from Red Canyon. I don't know why I like these platforms so much. They just look really cool. I like the designs. The sprite work is also looking as good as ever. Kirby and the returning enemies all look just as great as they did in the original game, and all the new characters like the animal friends and all the brand new foes Kirby has to contend with in this game fit right in, and their sprite work is just as good as the returning guys. Also really like the cutscenes in this game. It's kind of like a staple of the Dark Matter Trilogy to also feature like silly little cutscenes, and Dream 1 2 definitely has it the weakest out of all the games. Just Kirby messing around with animal friends in each of the different locations when you enter them for the first time, and you know, they're just nice little silly shenanigans. You can do with a little break from the action with these for a little bit, but they're not as impressive as anything we'll see later on. The music is also pretty similar to the rest of the presentation. It's good, but nothing particularly great. There's a few recycled tracks here, like the Float Islands theme playing in Ripple Field, for example, or Yogurt Yard being in Red Canyon. And while there's nothing wrong with bringing back banger tracks from the past, I do prefer remixes or original compositions, but Dream 1 2 has us covered in the original composition department because we got bangers like Cloudy Park, Dark Castle, Wielder of the Rainbow Sword, both the unused tracks, which we'll talk about in a little while. And the banger that is Big Forest. No, you're in for a good time when the hits. This song really makes you wonder how Big Forest didn't burn down with all that fire playing. I said it before, but Dream 1 2's OST isn't like too great though. Very few tracks like grab me like Big Forest does, so it just kind of isn't up to par with like the best of the best Kirby music. But I do really like it a lot. It's a great OST, but I don't want to play it throughout the entirety of this video. As you can probably tell, I've been playing some not Kirby's Dream 1 2 music because I think maybe that will get kind of annoying if you hear me talk over repetitive loops of Kirby's Dream 1 2 music throughout this entire video. I bet I drove at least one person to insanity playing Koo's theme for like 5 minutes straight in the intro, and yeah, I don't want that to happen to all of you, so I'll vary up the music a little bit. Dream 1 3 and 64 give me so many amazing tracks to work with. I could talk for literal hours over both of those OSTs, but with Dream 1 2 it's a little harder, so if you hear not Dream 1 2 music, just try to ignore it. Of course, I'll still put Dream 1 2 music in there. There are plenty of gems. I know no one cares, but still, I want to kind of respect the game a little bit while putting in whatever music I want, but you know, the game doesn't respect me, but I do respect it a little bit. I do have one problem with the OST though, besides the fact that it can't fit a video like this for the whole runtime, and that's more of like in the actual gameplay, because rather than hearing amazing tracks like Big Forest, you'll be hearing like Rick's theme or something, because when you ride an animal friend, their respective theme song will just constantly play. Now, I'm not saying these tracks are like bad or anything. Kind's theme is one of my personal favorites in the OST, but sometimes you just want to jam out to Big Forest, but you can't because you're riding an animal friend, and you kind of need to if you want that rainbow drop. Have them play throughout like the remainder of the level you pick them up in or something. I think that would have been a good fix to prevent these themes from feeling really overused. Maybe that would make them feel underused, I don't know. But I'd rather have the level themes playing more than the animal friend themes, because the level themes simply just have more variety, and I think they sound better overall. Dream 1 2 does have really good presentation, although I do think the fact that it's a Game Boy game does hold it back a little bit from being up there with some of the greats. Graphics are good, the music is good, but nothing stands out as being particularly remarkable or amazing or anything like that. It all works very well, no disrespect. I think it's all very good, especially by Game Boy standards, but it's just not up there with the best of the best. So with all of these more general aspects out of the way, let's dive right into our first Rainbow Island. Grassland! Wow, what a creative name.
Okay, so before we actually get into the meat of Grassland, there's one thing I need to talk about, and that's the little hub world for this Rainbow Island that we find ourselves in the moment we start the game. Every single Rainbow Island in the game has their own unique little hub world, and despite being unique, they really aren't anything special, so I'll just knock them all out right here because they're all super similar to each other. These hub worlds are just semi-large rooms with a bunch of doors scattered all over them so you can have access to every single stage on that one Rainbow Island. And yeah, that's pretty much it. They're all tailored to fit the Rainbow Island's theme. They're all perfectly symmetrical, so they're not really the most fun to jump around in. There's no little bonus doors like in Kirby's Adventure, but I do think that while they don't really add much in a positive or negative way, I can appreciate them simply for being a cool novelty, as well as adding a little more life to the Rainbow Islands, because let's face it, these really need something extra to make them feel like actual locations. Oh, and one more thing before we get into the actual stages of Dreamland 2, I will not be taking an in-depth level-by-level look at every single one like I'm planning to do with Dreamland 3 and 64, because, well, those games actually have easily distinguishable and recognizable stages. To show you where I'm coming from, let's take a look at Aquastar from Kirby 64 real quick. Each of these stages looks different, they have their own unique theme, but they are all water-based just like the planet that they are all set on, you know, Aquastar, water, and all that. But not only that, they all have their own unique gimmicks and vibes, and they play differently and stuff. All sorts of unique things to each stage, and it makes them really stand out from one another. It makes them all memorable. When you compare it with Cloudy Park from Dreamland 2, yeah, I bet most of you couldn't tell me the difference between stages 3 and 5. I really don't want this video to just become, I have nothing to say about this level or section, let's move on. So in order to prevent that, I'll trim the fat of what could potentially be a really long and tedious Dreamland 2 review, and I'll just talk about each of the Rainbow Islands in a more general overview. So what this means is I'll be able to talk about ability and animal friend introductions, how the animal friends and abilities work, rainbow drops and their locations and how to get them and stuff, the boss fights and how those work, and any notable pieces of level design or even entire stages that stick out to me, without needing to include any of the filler that I have absolutely nothing to say on. Like seriously, while I was playing the game, I was taking down notes for each of the stages, and man, like towards the end I was literally just writing down 1 or 2 sentences per stage. It was horrible. Nobody would enjoy a review like that. So now we can finally talk about Grassland, and how is it? Well, I think Grassland is a pretty good starting area for Dreamland 2. It's nice, it's simple, you get acquainted with Kirby, some abilities, and even our first animal friend. It's all very good for a starting area. It does kind of fall short in comparison to some areas we'll get to later, but for what it is, it does a really good job as a nice starting ground for new players. Right from the get-go, Stage 1 is just an excellent place to mess around with Kirby's inhaling and exhaling abilities. Tons of Waddle Dees, Bouncies, a newly introduced enemy in Dreamland 2, and the only one that actually managed to stick on, and the crack tweets. No, these are not hatched chicks. Hal is lying to you, they're trying to deceive you, do not fall for this. But basically, crack tweets are like Cappies if they were little chicks that hatch from their eggs. It's a cute and funny little enemy, I like them a lot. And I think Playground is a really good way to describe Grassland. It's like a little beginner's obstacle course. Lots of simple stuff for you to just kind of mess around with while you get acquainted with how the game works. And of course, being a Kirby game, this includes the introduction of our first 2 abilities, being Parasol and Burning. I think Parasol is the lesser of the 2 abilities, but it is by no means bad. Parasol acts just as it should in a classic Kirby game. You got that whack the Parasol forward attack, you got that little hitbox up on the Parasol, and you've got that floaty descent thing Parasol always has going on. It's a thing I was never really too big of a fan of, but whether I like it or not, it should always stay on Parasol. It's a part of the thing's identity. However, due to Dreamland 2 removing the slide, Parasol can no longer do that slide attack it had, which is pretty sad. It was a pretty fun move, but oh well, I'm not losing too much sleep over it. Only a little bit. Parasol may be a little toned down, but it's almost identical to its adventure counterpart, and it was pretty good in Kirby's Adventure, so I don't really see that as a bad thing. However, shortly after we see Parasol for the first time, we also get to see Burning, and Burning is the best ability for regular Kirby. Like I said before while I was talking about the game's controls, Kirby's moveset lacks any good fast movement options, so it's a little difficult to get away from some things, or just move quickly. If you want to speed up the game's pace, or if you happen to be put into a situation where you could really need a short burst of speed, Burning is your copy ability. As far as the one-button abilities from the older Kirby titles go, Burning was always one of my favorites. It's just a fast-moving fireball that tears through anything in its path, and in Dreamland 2, it's no different. It even has that cool bit of tech where you can just just slam it against a wall, and you will repeatedly just slowly move up the wall. You just crawl up it on top of getting a really satisfying sound whenever it hits the wall. It's just an awesome thing, and it really adds to the feeling that you can just mash the attack button endlessly, and you're practically unstoppable. I will always stand by burning. It's a really, really good ability for what it is. It was merged with fire eventually, so that gives fire the edge, but still, burning is a really damn good ability, and my favorite regular Kirby copy ability in Dreamland 2. Speaking of the burning ability, though, we get to meet the master of the burning ability in Grassland, as well as the first mid-boss of the game, who is none other than Les Ifrit, otherwise known as the Ifriti. I love this guy, he's so cool. I'm a sucker for random Kirby enemies and mid-bosses that show up in like 1 or 2 games and never again, and Ifriti definitely fits the bill. I think he's got a cool design, he's got plenty of cool fireball attacks, he's a decently fun fight by Kirby's Dream 1 2 mid-boss standards. It's like a really, really good package overall. I love this guy, I would love to see him come back one day. Always holding out hope for my boy Ifriti. He puts up a decent fight, but eventually he succumbs to Kirby's, methods. That bag that's hanging up in his chamber then proceeds to drop down, and hey, look, it's a strange creature who just decided to pop out of the bag. This strange creature is Rick, our first animal friend, and he's the hamster who specializes in traversing the land. How good of an animal friend is Rick? Well, I think he might be a little more of a hindrance than a help in Dreamland 2. Rick is a lot more physically capable than Kirby is. He can run faster than Kirby, he can jump higher than Kirby, and he is a ton of fun to traverse the land with, don't get me wrong, he's not a bad alternative to Kirby. Rick does have a few flaws, however, like the hitbox being expanded, although that is a problem with all the animal friends, so I can't fault him too much for that, but he does also have some of the worst copy abilities in the game, which we'll talk a little more about later on when we get to them, and he also struggles a bit with platforming due to the fact that while he can jump higher, if he makes one wrong jump, that basically spells doom, unless of course you want to abandon creature. Combine a couple of really bad copy abilities and the lack of a hover with the fact that the land is probably the easiest terrain for Kirby to traverse without an animal friend, and yeah, Rick definitely got the short end of the stick here. Now don't get me wrong, I love this creature a ton, he's tons of fun to bust out every once in a while, and I love doing some tricky platforming with him, it's always a good time, but as far as the actual capabilities of the animal friends go, Rick is easily the weakest out of the 3. Bro's even got the worst theme song out of all of them. This is so tragic, it's like they were trying to make him the worst. Well, at least Rick does decently with the 2 abilities we have access to right now. Parasol is once again the weaker of the 2 options, mostly due to the fact that it only has good vertical range and its horizontal range is just really, really bad. It's essentially just the hitbox of Rick, but at least you can just kind of stop dead in your tracks and do damage to anything that touches you, so I guess that's a plus. Not one I would really willingly bust out, but I guess it's better than some things we'll see later on. Burning, however, I do think is legitimately good. It's like Rick ate super spicy curry. He can shoot out a bunch of flames from his mouth, on top of being just a pretty fun ability idea. It's got some nice coverage, and I think it's just a pretty decent ability overall. I like it a lot. Stage 3 is the most interesting of all the Grassland stages, and it's not because there are 2 easy-to-get Maxim tomatoes in this one stage. Like, come on, this isn't even hard. Why are there 2 random Maxim tomatoes here? Come on! It's because this is the first stage to contain a rainbow drop, and compared to some of the more obscure ones we'll go on to see later on in the game, this one is just here on the main path, and all you need to access this is Parasol Rick. But what if you forget Parasol Rick? What if you bring Rick with a different ability, or no ability at all? Well, don't fret. Just leave this room and... oh look, a drifter is outside, and you can go back in the room, so, yeah, first rainbow drop down, let's go. I guess for an intro puzzle and kind of getting the player to learn what rainbow drops are and like how to collect them and get them motivated to collect them and stuff, this works. It's like super mind-numbing and ridiculously easy if you have like a brain cell, but it works. I'd certainly take this over some of the stuff later on though, don't get me wrong. Our first rainbow drop has been collected, and with that we can head on to our first boss fight, which is Wispy Woods, and yo Wispy, you doing alright? You see, the reason why Wispy Woods is wearing a mask and glasses is in order to satirize hay fever, which is a tree cold which is especially prominent in Japan. It's like a cold which is spread by trees. These swirly glasses are meant to play on the fact that the hay fever is a fever, so it makes you sick, and the swirly eyes are supposed to represent being sick. It's like the effects of getting sick. And the joke is, Wispy Woods, being the tree who spreads the hay fever, is sick because he has the hay fever. And the mask, Wispy Woods is wearing that in order to be a good citizen. He doesn't want to spread the hay fever because he is a tree and he spreads the hay fever and he's a good citizen. So yeah, remember kids, be a good citizen. Don't go spreading around colds or anything to random individuals. Be like Wispy. Wait, what do you mean my free trial of the Ultimate Kirby Iceberg Companion is up? Oh well, at least there's always that Ultimate Kirby Iceberg explaining video on YouTube, which is like 5 hours long, made by the magnificent Pekachow. that totally isn't me. On top of the usual apple dropping attack, Wispy Woods has learned a new trick during this fight, and no, it is not wearing a mask to protect the citizens of Dreamland. It is popping its roots through the ground to hit you. These roots will periodically attack you during the fight. They just pop out of the same few predetermined locations, so once you know where they are, you're a little safe, but it is kind of a beginner's trap considering the fact that all the abilities we have access to are close range, and getting up close is probably just gonna lead to a lot of root shanking. I really do love the amount of ground control this gives Wispy Woods. It adds a lot of pressure onto the fight and makes the ground feel a little more unsafe, which is a nice change of pace for a Wispy Woods fight, especially considering in Adventure you could literally just wail on this guy and he'd go down so fast. This is an excellent keep away tactic, and I really do like it. It's the thing that makes this one of the better Wispy Woods fights we've received. But once you decide to knock his mask off, Wispy Woods starts spitting out his disgusting germ-filled air puffs all over the place. Like seriously, this guy has no respect. Dude, you got hay fever, put that mask back on. But just be mindful of the air puffs and you're good. It's literally just more of the same fight, except he's got one new attack. It's a pretty good fight overall, one of the better Wispy fights like I said before, and it's just a pretty fun fight in general. Nice introductory fight, I really like it. Just decide to drop that ability and attack with projectiles, and you're golden. He'll go down in no time. Holy crap! Is that best music in the game, Forest? Alright, here we are in the second Rainbow Island, and with a brand new Rainbow Island comes a brand new task. Jam out to the big forest music. Yeah, you go, Rick, you know what you're doing. Yeah, hit that. Go, Rick. Go, Rick. Go, Rick. Go, creature. Big forest is a big forest. I know, I can't believe it either. They actually came up with a name more creative than Grassland. Congratulations, Rainbow Island's namer guy. You are such a genius. I love you so much. But due to Big Forest being a big forest, this leads to the levels having a more broad scope to them. There's a lot more vertical sections and stuff like that, which perfectly fits a certain animal friend we're going to be seeing in a little bit here. And by a little bit, I mean right now, because early into stage 1, we encounter this Scarfy in this room. Truly one of the hardest things to do in the game is defeating this Scarfy. This is a super difficult battle, but if you manage to actually win, this bag drops from the ceiling, and look who it is. It's Koo. We can finally abandon this strange I'm sorry, that was really mean. We can finally swap out Rick for Koo, and oh my god, Koo is just such a better animal friend in like every way compared to Rick. I'm sorry, but it's the truth. I know, the truth is a tough pill to swallow, my creature, but sometimes you just gotta get real. Where Rick excels on the land, Koo excels in the air, and I mean like really excels. This is like 10 times better than what Rick was doing. Koo can move freely to his heart's content. You can just fly around whichever way you want. Nothing's gonna stop you. Koo can't even like directly land on the ground. Koo is basically always floating, and it's just super easy to move out of harm's way. And Koo's noticeably faster movement speed compared to Kirby's hover, his main form of aerial transport, really does make the animal friend benefits from Koo a lot more noticeable than they are on Rick. Another nice thing about Koo is that if you hold a directional input and then press the A button, Koo flaps his wings real quick and he can gain a short burst of speed. Now if you decide to mash the A button while doing this, Koo will just keep flapping his wings, and it's essentially just a long air dash. You can keep going however long you like. I've said it 1,000 times before and I will say it once more, Kirby's moveset in Dreamland 2 lacks any good fast movement options, so Koo's flap dashes are a blessing to those who just want to go fast. The gameplay is noticeably faster when you're deciding to pull these out. It's just a lot more fun, honestly. I love doing this. And it even helps Koo get past these little air currents, which is more than I can say for Rick. There's like no special Rick terrain, only he can cross, so yeah, another Rick L. The only real issues I have with Koo are that his larger hitbox makes tighter sections a little more difficult to get through, and I always thought he struggled the most underwater too. I'll talk more about this once we get to water in Ripple Field, where it's properly introduced, but Koo was just never in his element underwater. This guy's a horrible swimmer. How about Koo's abilities? Well, there's a few abilities I'll talk about later which are introduced in Big Forest, and we'll cover those when we cover those. But for now, let's get Koo caught up with the rest of our crew by covering Burning and Parasol Koo. Burning Koo is a little difficult to put into words, but I guess the best way to describe it is it's kind of like a meteor. And when you press the attack button, he'll move in a downward angle and just pulverize anything in his way. Due to it moving at a downward angle, it's a little less versatile than Kirby's Burning. It's entirely possible to just wind up accidentally killing yourself by trying to use this, so that's clearly an issue. But I don't think it's a bad alternative to Kirby's Burning. It's just a little harder to use efficiently. The best way to describe Parasol Koo, besides just saying it's one of the best abilities in the game, is it's like a more controlled version of Tornado. At the same time, it's kind of toned down, but it's a little less spazzy and easier to control despite having some shorter bursts every time you press the B button. This is like the only instance in the game game where Ku's bigger size helps him more than it hurts. Due to the fact that a little parasol even protrudes out of the top of his head, it gives this ability some pretty good range for what it is, and you can just tear through anything that comes in your path. And due to it being more controlled, there's no need to worry about not hitting your targets. You're bound to hit whatever you're trying to hit every time. Towards the end of stage 1, we also encounter our first Sir Kibble, who gives us our first taste of the Cutter ability, so let's quickly go over how that works with all the characters. With Kirby, Cutter works exactly as it should. It's a boomerang projectile that comes out at a decent range, and if it doesn't hit anything on its way forward, it will come back to Kirby and maybe it will hit something then. I always thought Cutter had some particularly nasty starting lag in this game. Like, it's pretty difficult to aim in midair, and it also comes out pretty slowly, but besides that, it's a pretty good projectile, one of the better ones in Dreamland 2. Cutter Rick isn't exactly it though. Rick throws Kirby like a boomerang. He starts out at a slightly higher plane on his way forward, and on his way back, he moves at a little lower of a plane. He will always follow Rick no matter what he does, so you can kind of mess with the plane a little bit, but the main issue with this ability is that Rick is just left completely helpless. If something's coming for you from behind, yeah, good luck. It's not going to be particularly easy to deal with that because, you know, Kirby's just out there and Rick is completely defenseless. That's kind of the thing that really kills this ability. It's decent fun to use, and I think it does have some usage, so I guess that makes it a little better than a certain other ability we'll talk about in a second, but really, there's no reason to use this. Just don't. Cutter Ku is thankfully much better though, and probably one of the best projectiles in the game. Ku throws 3 cutter wings, run directly in front of him, and 2 at an angle above and below the direction he's facing, and this can do some pretty good coverage. It's kind of like a spread shot, except without the advantage of being able to get up close and do a lot of DPS. It's good for ranged attacks, and there's plenty of ways to just snipe enemies from a distance. It's a really good ability. I like it a lot. So on to stage 2. We start out in a pretty large room. It's got tons of fun hazards like some nice Gordo placements and tons of fun enemy placements. It's super fun to just explore and mess around in. But there's a little secret if you decide to check below the platform you start on. Going down here, you'll find a door which leads us to a rainbow drop, and what ability is exactly supposed to break this here? These are needle blocks. You want to know something about needle blocks? Needle hasn't been introduced as an ability yet, and there are no needle enemies in this entire room. So you need to go through this door, which you cannot go back from. Once you enter this room, you are stuck there, where you will encounter Spiky, the game's needle enemy, and from there, you will need to re-enter the stage just to get this one rainbow drop. So the only way to get this rainbow drop is by backtracking. I really don't like this that much. A backtracking-based collectible in a Kirby game just sounds so weird. I don't know why they couldn't have just put a Spiky at the end of this room. I think needing to go through all those Gordos and hazards again would be enough of a challenge, but like, it's already hidden. It's already an evolution of the first one. There's no reason to just force the player to backtrack into this stage just to get this rainbow drop. I know I'm harping on something that seems small, but it's just such a questionably designed collectible, and I don't really like it that much. So with Needle being introduced not too long ago, let's talk about it. And with Vanilla Kirby, yeah, I don't really like Needle that much. I was never a big Needle fan, even in the more modern titles where it has a more fleshed out moveset. I think Forgotten Land was the only game to really get Needle right. It's the only game where I could see myself just genuinely using it. And with Dreamland 2 being a classic game with a more limited moveset, obviously I'm not going to like Needle much here. Needle's biggest flaw is its lack of any real range, and when you compare it to another ability with a little range like Stone, at least that one lets you become invincible as long as you'd like, and you get to decide when to opt out of the transformation. Here, you just have Needles point out at Kirby for a little bit, and then they go back in. It's on a timer too, so you can't just hold them out forever. A pass on this one, I'm like never going to use this. With Ku, Needle just lets Kirby become a little spire of needles that kind of hangs down. You can hit things with it. It's pretty short-ranged. I'm not too big of a fan of it, but I suppose it does its job decently. It's an alright ability. And then there's Rick. Oh my void. Needle Rick is horrible. What this ability does is it lets Rick just have a bunch of spikes protrude from his back, and that's pretty much it. So what's the problem? If you want to attack an enemy directly in front of you, you need to turn around and hit them with the spikes on Rick's back. In Kirby's Dream Land 2, you're mostly going to be moving, like, forward, and very few enemies are just going to try to jump you from behind. Sure, there's enemies like that, but that's such a situational use, and it's not like these enemies are such a big pain in the ass that this ability is, like, required to deal with them. The range on Needle Rick is bad because the spikes only protrude out of one side on Needle Rick. They're super short-ranged, and they only show up on the side that Rick isn't going to be facing enemies with most often. There's no additional fun factor like there is with Cutter, despite all that one's issues, and it's just garbage. Even the abilities I said I'm not a fan of, they at least work. This isn't even like functional. This is trash. Don't even bother using this. This is the only legitimately bad ability in the game. So Needle had a pretty lackluster set of abilities, and spoiler alert, Kind will not really change that. So let's head on to stage 3 of Big Forest, and this is the best one in this little area. There's tons of nice rooms here. There's some pretty good vertical rooms, a nice room near the end that has a good horizontal and vertical scope. We even get to meet Jumper Shoot for the first time here, a Parasol mid-boss who takes inspiration from a yokai who can fling his sandal around like nobody's business. I think he's a pretty cool guy. I'd love to see him come back one day. This stage also introduces the dreaded propeller enemy, and in the meanest way possible too. They give you a nice open area to explore, and bam, get fucked, propeller! The thing with these guys is they're normal around Kirby, just vanilla Kirby. They don't try to attack him or anything, they're just jolly little fellas. But once Kirby approaches them with an animal friend, they go ballistic. Kirby's trying to cheat on them with this strange creature, so they start chasing after Kirby and his animal friend, and just a single hit from this guy can just get rid of your animal friend regardless of how much HP they have left. So how exactly are you supposed to deal with propellers? Well, one way is by outrunning them. They will explode after a long period of chasing Kirby. This isn't the most reliable though, because they do move pretty quickly, and when level design gets in the way, you can easily become sitting propeller food. The other way to defeat a propeller is by attacking it, but these guys take a ton of hits to kill, and some abilities aren't really equipped to deal with such a formidable foe. They are too close range to put up with this guy. Thankfully, ice abilities can insta-kill it, turning propeller into a little propeller ice cube, but ice just so happens to be the rarest ability in the game, first showing up in Iceberg and appearing a few more times after that, so have fun. Now we get to the most memorable boss fight in Kirby history and the boss of Big Forest, Nruff and Nelly. I'm sure we all remember this fight super well. The fight's kinda like Lolo and La La La, but kinda not at the same time. You have one target, which is Nruff, but there are 3 different elevations you can easily swap through by going through different holes in each one, and you're mostly just gonna be spitting out a bunch of Nellies at Nruff trying to take it down. Nruff and the Nellies can also change their elevation whenever they want by jumping up and down between the platforms. They can also kind of fake you out sometimes, I guess that's cool. There's also this bomb that shows up sometimes during the fight. You can't inhale it or anything, so just stay away from it when it explodes and you're good. I wouldn't say that this is a bad fight, but I don't think it's as good as Wispy Woods. Nobody ever remembers or talks about this fight. It's just forgotten by the Kirby community, and there's a reason why Nruff was demoted to a basic enemy in Kirby's Dream Land 3. Let's go onward to Ripple Field. Dreamland 2's token water area is Ripple Field, and due to Ripple Field having a copious amount of water, what better area to evaluate the water mechanics in than here? We've seen water a few times before, like in Grassland, but this is just a tiny shallow pool. What am I supposed to evaluate here? Now that there's actually some space to move around, we should probably get on checking how Kirby controls underwater. Kirby is not exactly in the best swimming shape this time around because his swimming controls are pretty slippery. They're kind of fun to mess around with, but when it really comes down to it and you're trying not to get hit or something, Kirby's mechanics make him a little difficult to maneuver underwater, but at least they're better than the ones of Rick and Koo. These guys move just as awkwardly. Their larger hitboxes make them easier targets, and for some reason Koo just controls horribly under the water. I don't really have this problem with Rick, and it's hard to put into words why Koo feels so weird, but he was not made for aquatic movement. You can tell I'm struggling in this footage. Unlike in Kirby's Adventure, all copy abilities can be used underwater this time around, but as a drawback, they move ridiculously slowly underwater, and some of them even have hindered range. There's also a water gun attack, which is like a replacement for the inhale being used whenever a character tries to attack underwater with no copy ability. Kirby gets it the best between all these characters, once again being able to aim it in all 4 directions, while Rick and Koo can only aim it left and right. So how exactly are we supposed to efficiently travel across water areas if none of the characters particularly excel in this aspect? It's probably not a ton of fun to do, and you're right, it's not. Unless you're using Kind, the brand new animal friend introduced in Ripple Field and our 3rd and final one in this game. Kind is a sunfish who excels in terms of underwater movement. He is easily the best character to use underwater, but then again, it's not really even close. Of course, Kind's the best one. Being underwater is like his element. He's a fish, but still, congrats to Kind for making this fun. Kind's movement underwater is a lot like Koo's in the air, because they can both move around freely in their respective environments. The A button giving both characters a little boost forward, which can be changed into a bunch of little boosts forward by mashing the A button, which speeds up the gameplay a ton. There's even some underwater currents for Kind, much like how there's a windy currents for Koo, which can only be crossed by those respective animal friends. The only difference between the two, though, is that I think Kind is a little bit better, and that's mostly because no other character controls good underwater. Say what you want about Koo being better than Kind overall, but at least Kirby's hover is a good alternative to Koo's flight. It's outclassed by it, sure, but it at least works. It's a good move, but all the other characters really do struggle underwater. Kind is leaps and bounds ahead of them, and Kirby is like the best one besides him, and he's decent at best. The way Kind moves underwater just feels so smooth and so good, and the fact that no other character can even compare to this makes Kind my favorite animal friend in Kirby's Dream Land 2, and probably the secret best one. I know, you're saying he sucks on land, and yeah, he kinda does. His little short hops he has instead of a walk are pretty bad, but if you know how to use the jump efficiently, you can maneuver the land easily with Kind, and it's super fun to do either way. And also Kind lets Kirby inhale underwater. Nothing like being able to get your ability stars back whenever they're knocked out of you by a stray enemy. It just feels so good. It's the cherry on top of this whole thing. Kind's also got a nice selection of copy abilities, so let's get to talking about those. To quickly get Kind caught up with the rest of our animal friends, Parasol is pretty mid. Kind just sticks a parasol out of his mouth. He can barely move while using it. I wouldn't really bother with this one. It's not too good. Burning is a little better. He shoots out a fireball the size of one block. It can be a little tricky to aim as such, but it's got some decent range, and it's a fine projectile otherwise. Cutter is a serious contender for one of the best projectiles in the game. It starts out pretty small, but after like a second, it becomes pretty wide and can easily hit things. It's also easily spammable if that really matters for anything. And Needle is pretty lacking, probably the first real creatively bankrupt ability we've seen so far. It's like normal Needle, but with a funny animation and a slightly bigger hitbox. It's a little better, but this one isn't really impressive. Our first new ability is Stone, which first shows up in Stage 1 and is given to us by some Rockies there. What Stone does is it lets Kirby transform into an invincible stone, and he gets to call the shots whenever he comes out of this transformation. Here's your Kirby spicy take of the day. I never really cared much for Stone. I get why people say it's a really good ability, I get why people say it's like busted and stuff, because really it is, and I can acknowledge its good points, but it was always just too slow for my liking. It never really suited my playstyle, and also I never really had a skill issue, so maybe that factors in a little bit. And it's no different in Dreamland 2. It's a good ability, but I'm not really a big fan of using it. It's not my type. Although I do really like how it rolls down slopes. It's just such a fun thing to watch. Kind's pretty new. Let's see how he handles Stone. You know, show us what you got, Kind. Show us what you... Oh. That's just like Stone with a bigger hitbox and a silly looking Kind. It's like Needle Kind, except it's Stone, so it's a little better. Also, I like seeing him slide down slopes. It looks funny. Ku also isn't too much different than Vanilla Stone. He just drops down with Kirby transformed into a stone, although there are some little smoke puffs that form once Kirby hits the ground, which gives it a little more range. It's a little better, but it's pretty close to the real deal. Rick, for once, actually gets the best version of the copy ability, but even then, it's not too remarkable. Rick transforms into a stone and Kirby rolls around on him. He balances on top of the stone Rick. It's just a really fun ability to use. It's not the most practical ability because Kirby is just a weak point. If anything touches him, he's like immediately snapped out of the transformation, but it's just such a fun ability. I can look past that and acknowledge just how good it is. It's so goofy. It's just a ton of fun to use. And once again, rolling down slopes with it is just the most fun thing ever. Rolling down enemies with this feels like committing vehicular manslaughter with a giant hamster rock. You don't get better than this. Stage 1 was mostly island themed and it was good fun, but Stage 2 plunges us right underwater, and thankfully we can get Kind fairly quickly by entering this door where we fight the mid-boss Master Green, this spark-wielding jellyfish who is actually a yellowish-orange color, not actually green. I don't know why he's called that, but I'd still love to see this guy come back. I know I keep saying that, but the mid-bosses in this game are pretty cool. Maybe just give him a green paint job, though, so he's a little more accurate to the name. I think that would be pretty cool. Now, as for the ability, he gives us Spark. Spark Kirby is alright. It's kind of like a Needle, except with a little more range and the infinite duration of Stone, where you get to call it off, so it's like a perfect middle ground between those. I'd use it over both of them personally. I think it's a little more fun to use and I like the sounds it makes, but it's not like a big difference. It's a pretty similar ability, and it's still not one I would find myself using too much. Spark Rick, on the other hand, is amazing. It's one of Rick's best abilities because it's literally just Beam.
Beam attack!
Beam didn't make the cut in Kirby's Dream Land 2, and to see it be repurposed into Spark Rick is just so cool. I love how they managed to bring it back in such a nice way, and it's Beam. It's a great classic ability. It works just as well as it should. It's fucking Beam. I don't know what else to say. Spark Ku isn't as impressive, though. It just lets Ku shoot down little lightning bolts from below, and yeah, that's pretty much it. You kind of stop dead in your tracks when you use it, which I'm not too big of a fan of, but that was to prevent it from being too busted. And I mean, you can still kind of simulate that raging thunderstorm effect by just mashing the button while moving. It's just not one I see myself using too often, not because it's bad or anything, just because I, never use it. And this brings us to the greatest ability in Kirby's Dream Land 2, Spark Kind. Where do I begin with Spark Kind? This ability is just on a whole nother level. Spark Kind lets Kind stick a light bulb out of his mouth for as long as he wants, and he can move around while doing it too. and it's just a ridiculously overpowered attack. You can just leave this out for an entire stage and tear through anything in front of you. Not only that, but this light bulb doubles as a projectile. If you release the attack button, the light bulb comes firing out, and if you press the attack button again, it actually detonates and there's a little explosion. This versatility is just ridiculous, and it's also the only ability that can light up dark rooms, which is key to revealing all sorts of little secrets, including the next rainbow drop. That's pretty impressive. It's the only ability that can do this. The versatility on Spark Kind is insane, and it makes it the best ability in the game. Undoubtedly, no other ability even comes close to this. This is just ridiculous. It's also probably the best propeller killer in the game besides the ice abilities, because you can essentially just stun lock these guys, so that's another plus. Just another thing to put onto the throne of Spark Kind. From here on out, Stage 2 is mostly just a bunch of underwater sections. They're fun, assuming you bring Kind into every single one of them. Then we get to the big one, which is Stage 3. Here we not only have our rainbow drop, but Eliel. We get introduced to him for the first time. The funny little eel who pops on the pipes. Look at him wave. Look at him wave. He shows up in like 2 to 3 levels in the entire game, by the way. Look at him wave. He also has the craziest Kirby redemption arc in history. DDD and Magalore ain't got nothing on this, guys. Just know that when we get to it in the Dream 1-3 video, it's gonna be nuts. It's gonna be inspirational. You'll laugh, you'll cry, you'll love Eliel. Look at him wave. But as for our rainbow drop, in this room with all these Eliels, look at them all wave. You'll find a little underwater section with a door that is blocked by some currents, which can only be accessed by using Kind. In this room, it's just completely dark. You can't really see anything in here. So bring Spark Kind into the room and you can light it up, which reveals a door. This door leads us to the rainbow drop, but we need the stone ability in order to break these blocks. So just head to the end of this section, pick up the stone ability, go back, go where the door was, where you learned it was from using Spark before, and there you go, you get your rainbow drop. This is what the second one should have been like. This is one of the best rainbow drops in the game. I know it sounds kind of sad considering this is like a pretty simple puzzle, but the bar for rainbow drops in Dream 1-2 is pretty low, so I'll take what I can get. You get the rainbow drop by solving a nice and intuitively designed puzzle, which makes use of 2 different copy abilities and an animal friend, which is pretty cool. And there's nothing like convoluted, no bullshit's being pulled here. It's pretty straightforward stuff, and if you go in there with Kind, you can basically solve the puzzle in this one room. No backtracking or anything. It's basic, but it's super effective. It's easily the best rainbow drop we've seen up to this point, and there is no competition. Our third boss fight is against Sweet Stuff, this giant anglerfish over here, and there are so many unique things that go on in this fight, and it makes it my favorite in the game. To get the basics out of the way, this fight is literally in an auto-scrolling underwater cavern. No other fights take place underwater, no other fights are auto-scrolling, and that alone really sets this fight apart from the other ones. You can tell something different is about to go down here. This fight always has you moving around. You're always doing something, whether it's moving out of the way of those hills that show up on the floor and ceiling, to the different things that Sweet Stuff sends out to attack you, including his tin cells or his squishies or his lasers. This fight always has you doing something, you're always busy, and I think the reason why that works so well is because you're underwater, so you're given a lot more free space to just move around easily. Don't even get me started on the fact that there's 2 different ways to tackle this fight, and I'm not just talking about bringing different copy abilities in here. I wouldn't really recommend bringing abilities into the fight though. They move pretty slowly and they're more of a hindrance than anything else, so doing it without abilities is the best way to go. With Kind, it plays more traditionally. You suck stuff up, you spit it back out, but when you play it with any of the other characters and no ability, you instead need to use the water gun in order to fire things back at him. It changes up the fight just a little bit, but just enough to really make it an entirely different and unique experience, which is completely fresh and unlike anything we've seen up to this point in the series. Sweet Stuff's fight is the definition of a hidden gem. There are very few fights in the Kirby series that play like this one with the whole water gun mechanic you can alternatively do along with sucking things up, and while I wouldn't say it's the best out of them all, it definitely has the most unique features going on for it. Sadly, the Sweet Stuff fight seems to have been forgotten along with stuff like Ruff and Nelly, which is pretty sad because that fight was like nothing special while Sweet Stuff is like leagues ahead of it, and hopefully this fight can get the love and respect it deserves at some point in the future because it really is an underrated gem. Iceberg. Like the ultimate Kirby Iceberg? Like the ultimate Kirby Iceberg explained by Pekachow? Iceberg arguably has the most creative name out of all the Rainbow Islands, and as that name manages to subtly imply, this is the game's signature ice area, so let's see how good the ice physics are here because, of course they're here. These are ice physics. They make your character's control a little more slippery, and that's just about it. I don't really think these ice physics are annoying at all. In fact, I like them quite a bit due to how fun it is to slide down icy slopes. And I'll also give them some credit for giving Rick a more unique skill. He can't slip on ice, but it doesn't really matter too much considering ice shows up like in Iceberg and we hardly ever see it again. I guess this is good for Rick. It's not like an exclusive Rick terrain, but it's something. Minor Rick W. And to just get this out of the way, in Stage 1 of Iceberg, we are introduced to the 7th and final copy ability in this game, which is the Ice ability. So, for the final time, let's go and evaluate every character's take on this ability. Ice Kirby works just as he did in Kirby's Adventure. He's able to shoot out a short-ranged beam of ice breath, and if any enemies get caught up in the ice breath, they're frozen into little ice cubes which Kirby can then push into other enemies. Ice is one of my favorite Kirby copy abilities due to its ice cube property, making it such a fun ability to play around with, and while Dream 1 2 is a little light on ice moves, I do think it is still a pretty fun ability. I don't use it too often, but it is undoubtedly one of the best abilities in Dream 1 2 for base Kirby. Also, I already mentioned this once before, but I'll bring it up now that it's relevant. Ice is the only ability that can kill propellers in a single hit. It freezes them into little ice cubes that you can push around. And I just want to mention this because it earns all these ice abilities a few extra points in my book because good riddance to those nuisances. Ice Rick is essentially just Freeze Kirby from Kirby's Adventure, and I don't think that's a bad thing. Hell, I'd argue Freeze was just a better ability than Ice back in these days due to its surrounding cold aura rather than just the single beam of cold breath Ice got. A chilly aura surrounds Rick, and anything that happens to touch him is just turned into a little ice cube, which can once again be pushed around by Rick and used against other enemies. And due to Rick's bigger hitbox, it makes it even easier to freeze things than it was with Freeze. Definitely one of the best abilities in the game, and probably Rick's best. Also, while using this ability, Rick and Kirby just become this little creature snowman. It's so cute. Next up is Ice Coup, and I forget this ability exists most of the time, but it's not a bad ability. Kirby turns into this little ice-breathing jet, and he gets a half circle below Coup to work with. You can aim the ice breath in any way below that half circle, and yeah, that's pretty much it. In order to use this one effectively, you need to aim it, so it can be a little cumbersome to use, but I do think it is a great ability in its own right. But it's got nothing on Ice Kine, yet another busted Kine ability. Ice Kine is a lot like Ice Rick and the fact that they are both like Freeze Kirby, but unlike Ice Rick, which was mostly faithful, Ice Kine lets you walk around with a freezing aura, so you just become this walking, freezing fish of death. Just don't use it for too long or else, that's not good. Yeah, if you hold the button down for too long, Kine just freezes into a little fish ice cube. I think it's a pretty cute animation though. But how exactly is this one of the most broken abilities in the game when there's such a serious balancing measure in place? The answer: you can simply just mash the button or periodically release the button after every few seconds in order to ensure that you never reach this freezing state and you always have your cold aura around you, so you're unstoppable. It's of course not on the same level as Spark Kine. They seriously did try to balance this one, but this is a pretty glaring oversight and it makes the ability just a huge, broken, and fun mess to play around with. It's a perfect way to cap off all the Dream 1 2 abilities, and in case you're wondering, here's the definitive Dream 1 2 ability tier list. I'll give you a second to pause the video in case you want to analyze this. Alright, back to the video. Iceberg is the first Rainbow Island to feature 4 stages rather than just 3, and what I find interesting about its structure is that its first 3 stages are all like little animal friend tests where they're beneficial or even required in order to clear the stage, while Stage 4 marks the point where Kirby's Dream 1 2 takes the training wheels off and things get serious. Stage 1 is based around Rick, and it's probably the only stage where you'll be using Rick's walk normally on ice skill. Stage 2 is built around Coup, which is pretty apparent from the get-go because you practically need this guy in order to flat past this northern wind and reach this door here in the first section of the stage. That's not the only piece of level design that requires you to use a certain thing though, because later on you are forced to use the burning ability to mow down all these ice blocks near the end. This also contains the meanest propeller placement in the game. Like, they're practically encouraging you to explore every inch of this area. Why is there just a propeller in this corner? How does anyone make it out of here with Coup intact? And Stage 3 is a test with Kine. There's tons of great usage with my favorite fish friend here. Lots of underwater sections, so you better use Kine or you'll have a bad time. Nothing quite like this one. It's a pretty banger stage, all things considered. Also, Mr. Frosty.
And me, Blocky, I'm also in this.
He shows up in like 2 stages in the whole game. If any of you guys care about the mid-boss appearances still. The Dumpy? With this stage down, we can go fight Ice Dragon. He's an Ice Dragon, by the way. And look, we're off to Red Canyon. More like Green Canyon, because I forgot to record all this footage on the Super Game Boy. Ha, that's quite wacky and silly. I can't believe I forgot to turn the filter on. Did you know that this area is a big reference to the Ultimate Kirby Iceberg by Pekachow? Pekachow owns like this really cool YouTube channel. Also, I heard Pekachow's really sexy in real life, and you should probably sub to the YouTube channel. Also, did you know that this game is called Kirby's Dream 1 2? It was released in 1995 for the Nintendo Game Boy, and it's like Kirby's Dream 1 but 2, and there's a bunch of little animals in it. Like, there's this one creature. His name is Rick. He looks like a mouse, but he's actually a ham. You want me to talk about the rainbow drop, don't you? I could just see it in your eyes. Well, I don't really have any other choice. We gotta be as comprehensive as possible here, so, Iceberg Stage 4, here we come, unfortunately. So how exactly does one get the rainbow drop in Iceberg? Well, to start, you need to bring Kine into Stage 4, and then you need to get past an auto-scrolling section with Burning intact, and trust me, this isn't very fun. There's two different ways of bringing Burning with you past the auto-scrolling section, and the first and easier way is by nabbing this flamer right at the end of the section, but it's a little tricky due to the fact that he's, like, blocked by a wall, which will crush you if you're too slow, and Kine moves super slow on land, so it's super tense. Or you could take the path that I thought was the only way to properly do this as a kid, and that is by bringing Burning Kine with you from the very start. I have no idea why I didn't just decide to get the flamer right at the end. I always thought that was like a signal that you need to bring Burning in there. I'm so stupid. The reason why this Iceberg rainbow drop triggers so much PTSD in me is I thought you needed to get past these star blocks with this 1 block thick fireball from Burning Kine. It drove me insane as a kid. I hated this. The next room starts off pretty basic. It's kind of like a breather. Just don't get hit by any of the enemies and you'll be good. You want to keep your burning ability for when you get to the center of the room, where you need to start this off by breaking some ice blocks. You need to go off into these little corners on the side. They require you to just drop down there a little bit and destroy a few blocks, but don't get too tempted by the goodies down here, because if you get tempted by this one up, yeah, it's over. You can't get out of this pit with Kine if you destroy too many ice blocks, and you need to do everything all over again. And then we get to the most infamous part of the entire rainbow drop. Nothing quite like needing to go underwater, drop your ability star, quickly inhale one of these star blocks, and hope you don't aim it in the direction your ability star is, or else you will break the ability star thanks to the game's broken ability star mechanics. And then you need to go back, get your ability star, swallow it, then drop it again and repeat this entire thing, because Kine cannot fit in this space because he is 2 blocks thick. And then you can finally go down here and claim your rainbow drop. And in case you decided to do this without the burning ability, here's some star blocks and a little Gordo for your troubles. It's just a prank, bro. What are you so mad about? I'll give this puzzle one thing. It is very cleverly designed. That is undeniable. Needing to drop your ability star is a little cryptic, but I think most people would be able to pick up on the fact you can inhale your ability stars again and get your abilities back underwater with Kine. But just because it's super clever and smart doesn't mean it's gonna be fun, and it doesn't mean you should do it. Like, seriously, this rainbow drop is my worst enemy. It's my arch nemesis. This started my Dreamland 2 hater arc. I hate this thing so much. The amount of trouble this thing caused me as a kid and the amount of stress it can induce in me now is just ridiculous. Okay. That's enough of that. We don't need to talk about this rainbow drop anymore. That's a thing of the past. Hopefully I can never, ever, ever talk about this one again. So let's talk about Ice Dragon, is what I would say if I really had anything to say about this fight. There's all the usual Ice Dragon attack staples. He's got that Iceberg tail swing attack. He's got the icicles that drop from the ceiling. He's got his ice breath. It's all there. It's all good, but it's just not a particularly remarkable fight. It's all just kind of there. Maybe this is why Ice Dragon is usually just lumped in as a smaller fight in games like Dreamland 3 and Planet Robobot. It's not even like the real deal Ice Dragon either, it's just a copy. I'll be real, I like the guy himself more than I like the actual fight. I just really want to give Ice Dragon a hug. I hope Ice Dragon gets tackled again in the future at some point in a legit battle against the real deal, because I think there is some potential here if they decide to add a little more going on with the fight. It's still a good fight though, definitely better than Rough and Nelly. Red Canyon, more like Green Canyon because I forgot to play on the Super Game Boy. Ayo! Red Canyon is going to mark the point where we kind of pick up the pace on this review. Not because I don't want this to be too long, over an hour, because yes, we have been talking about this game for over an hour now, thanks for asking. I don't even know how this is humanly possible. But because all of our abilities and animal friends have already been established and properly introduced, so I no longer need to go into describing what all those do, so we can kind of cut out some of that fluff in the previous sections. Also, this is the point where some levels start to blend together a little bit more because they're not really introducing anything, so I won't always have something to say on all the stages. It's not really a big Red Canyon issue, but it will definitely be important for Cloudy Park, but we'll get to that in a moment. Alright, so I'm going to start this Red Canyon bit out with a pretty bold statement. I think Red Canyon is probably my favorite area in the game. Not because it's like leaps and bounds ahead of everything else, not because it's particularly amazing, but because it has plenty of stages that I remember very well and had a ton of fun going through. I think Dreamland 2's usual level design quality borders around good, pretty good, somewhere around that baseline of quality, so I do think having a Rainbow Island loaded with a bunch of great stages really helps it rise above the rest. Red Canyon starts off with a bang with Red Canyon Stage 1, which is probably my favorite stage in the entire
entire game. It is just pure platforming bliss. And while it's not like particularly amazing platforming, it's just a fun platforming romp all the way through. And there's tons of really creative things that go on here, like with this section here with these Gordos and these disappearing platforms. That always really stuck out to me as being pretty unique. I always remembered Red Canyon Stage 1 as being a highlight of Kirby's Dream Land 2, and after this recent playthrough, it absolutely held up. It's still one of the best stages in the game. Also, now that we're in Red Canyon, I think it's fair to shout out the slopes because they're all over these stages, which is a good thing, because I think the slopes are just so fun to mess around with or without the stone ability. They're just so fun to slide down. Another one of Red Canyon's highlights is Stage 3, which features 3 different doors at the start of the stage, each one giving you one of the off-brand Meta Knights to fight, being Butch, Blade, and Masher, and for some reason, Masher's like the only one of these guys to have stuck around. Don't know why this guy decided to stay around considering he's a part of this off-brand group of Meta Knights, but the other two, they just kind of vanished. No one really remembers these guys. Also, this trio of enemies always just really stuck out to me. For one, they're just random off-brand Meta Knights. Why are these guys even here? Why couldn't they just use the normal Meta Knights or something? But it's not just because of that. It's also because these guys act a little unique mechanically because they cannot be inhaled. They can only be defeated with a Star Bullet, an Air Puff, or a copy ability attack. It makes them a little unique to go against, but after you defeat each of them in these doors, you'll be granted with an animal friend, and whatever animal friend you get in there, you'll be able to bring with you through the rest of the stage. And I also loved how this stage was just perfectly designed with all the animal friends' skills in mind, but the thing is, you can only bring one of them with you, so while Ku will have an easy time flying over the land sections of the stage, he's gonna have a ton of fun underwater, I can just tell. Kine is once again the best choice for this stage because you could just bring Spark Kine in and easily plow through anything, and he even gets access to this little secret room in the underwater section, but still, it's a really cool idea, and it's something that could only work in Dreamland 2. Now, before we get into the big stage here, which is Stage 5, for more reasons than just the Rainbow Drop, I also want to touch on Stage 2 and 4 a little bit. These are alright stages, although I don't really remember them much. They introduce the mid-bosses Yu, the awesome cutter ninja. I love this guy, he's so cool. And Captain Stitch, the big Gordo who gives you the needle ability, who's also really cool, and also raises the question if Gordos can be killed if their spikes are removed. I do remember Stage 2 having an auto-scrolling section near the end, which was alright, and I also remember Stage 4 having some wind currents, which was like the first time they were experimented with in a way that wasn't like Ku mandatory, which is pretty cool. And now we get to the final and biggest stage in Red Canyon, which is Red Canyon Stage 5. And this one features the Rainbow Drop, so let's go talk about that first. This is my favorite Rainbow Drop in the entire game due to the fact that it's less of a puzzle and more like an execution-based challenge where you need to carry Spark Rick with you through this auto-scrolling section, which can be pretty tight considering Rick's size. It's not a particularly difficult one to nab, but it's the most fun to do simply due to the fact that it's less of a one-and-done thing. You actually need to do more than simply just solve a basic puzzle, and I really like that. I wish Dreamland 2 had a little more variation in its Rainbow Drops, and I think for what this one is, it does it really well. And with the Rainbow Drop out of the way, we can talk about some of the other oddities within Stage 5, starting with the Orca Room, the more tame of these two oddities. At one point in the stage, you'll be met with 2 different doors for you to enter, and if you choose the left one, rather than being sent forward in the stage like the right one does, you'll be sent to a little secret area which can only be lit up by Spark Kine. When you do light it up though, you're greeted to a picture of an orca whale on the wall, complete with the description Orca. What's especially cool about this orca portrait is that if you decide to enter it like you would a regular door, you'll be sent to a little tropical island paradise full of a bunch of point stars and a few propellers, so be careful of those guys. Why exactly this orca room exists is unknown, but it's speculated that this was kind of a way to include Acro in the game, because as you can clearly see, he is in this concept art along with Kirby riding his tank. This picture gives us enough information to know that Acro was at the very least conceptualized during Dreamland 2's development, and maybe he wasn't able to like fit in the cartridge space, or maybe they weren't able to just implement him into the game or something, so they decided to simply just relegate him to a little cameo in here, or at least kind of. This is more of a generic looking orca whale than Acro the whale, but still pretty close. At the very least, we do get to see this guy in the blubber in Kirby's Dreamland 3 and Kirby 64, and he's got some pretty good boss fights there too, so it's all good. And then this brings us to the more famous of the oddities, but also the more risque one. The hidden naked woman made out of star blocks. As some of you may recall, this stage ends with a little vertical descent to the goal door, complete with a bunch of star block formations, and if you decide to pay extra close attention to these formations, or if you simply just look at a map of the stage, all these star block formations combine to make up a very crudely drawn image of a naked woman's body. I don't think I need to explain what everything here is supposed to represent. I think that is pretty clear, but still, it's crazy to think that this actually made it into a Kirby game. Why exactly is this here? Nobody really knows because no one on the development team has ever acknowledged this. It's just here.
The most we can assume is that somebody must have walked into HAL Laboratory pretty down bad that day. Up next is our boss fight against Mr. Shine and Mr. Bright, and these guys had a rough transition to the small screen, I must say, because sadly, this is the worst boss in the entire game. This fight is pretty similar to how it is in Kirby's Adventure. They have all their usual attacks like the sun rays and the shooting stars and the moon cutters and the fireballs, and they switch places between being on the ground and in the sky, but this time, things can get a little tight because this fight does not translate well to the small screen at all. The duo also has a brand new Eclipse attack they will do whenever they're swapping places, and depending on where the little safe spot is, it can be, like, impossible to not get hit by. This is probably the biggest instance of Kirby's lack of a dash or a slide coming into play, because having something like that could make this just an easy fix, that you could easily get there. But if you want to, like, get through this, you're gonna need, like, burning or something, because Kirby just doesn't have the walk speed in order to cover the whole distance of the room before their eclipse goes off. Well, to be completely fair, this is a readable and perfectly dodgeable attack most of the time, but still, the fact that stuff like this can even happen really just shows that this game needed, like, at the very least a slide. Say what you want about a dash being able to cover short little Game Boy levels too quickly, but a slide would have been great here, come on. It's not really a bad fight per se. I think all the fights in Dream On 2 are at the very least decent, but this one easily misses the mark the most. It's just a really, really botched interpretation of a classic fight. And it especially stings being the finale to my favorite Rainbow Island, so that just rubs some further salt in the wound. Definitely not the best way to go out here. It's Cloudy Park time, baby! Cloudy Park is a pretty interesting area in Kirby's Dream On 2, not because it's particularly remarkable or anything, but more because it's the one I have the least to say about. There's a lot of really good platforming here, like in the entirety of Stage 1, which is another contender for one of the best stages in the game, as well as in Stage 5. There's this missed opportunity here to make this giant structure of disappearing blocks a little more interesting, like seriously, hide some secrets below some of these or something, but there is a really cool part near the end where you need to time your jumps and make them a little shorter in order to not be blown away by the giant wind current right above your head. But 1, 5, and 2, which we'll talk about in a moment because it has our rainbow drop, are really the only ones that stick out to me because the other 3 all just really blend together. There's a surprising amount of water sections in Cloudy Park. They do a good job expanding on the wind mechanics we played around with a little bit in Red Canyon with like those pipes that shot out wind. There's also this like ruin structure that shows up and there's like wheels popping out of the blocks. Hey yo, look at him wave! And also I think in Stage 6 there's also that formidable spark block mid-boss, truly the most difficult thing in the game. Still makes me shiver when I think about it, but besides that, I really couldn't tell you where most of this stuff came from, like what stage exactly we saw most of this in, because all the stages just feel super similar. I know it might be because we already, like, introduced every single gimmick this game has to offer, but still, they could have done a little bit of a better job of making them all stick out. Previous Rainbow Islands have done a decent job with that, so I don't see why Cloudy Park just kind of dropped the ball, or maybe I was just getting really burned out playing this game. We've just started talking about Cloudy Park, and we've almost wrapped up. I really don't have much else to say here, so let's talk about our Rainbow Drop, then we'll go fight our boss. And, yeah, that rainbow drop is a pretty interesting one. No other rainbow drop in the game requires this much work. You need to use all 3 animal friends plus multiple abilities in order to get it, and here's how you do that. Play through the first part of the stage as normally, just make sure you are riding Kind though, because he will be important in just a second. Once you reach the second room, drop down and find this secret door, which we'll talk about in a second. Go against this current here, you'll find Master Green. Once you find him, defeat him and take his spark ability, then go find the secret door again. Go with the current this time, you'll find Blocky, defeat Blocky, don't take his ability though, only take Rick who will drop from the bag. By this point, you should have Spark Rick. Just play through the second room as normally. When you get to this part with the Shotzos perched on top of these spark blocks, use Rick's beam attack in order to drop them down. It's the only thing that can reach them, so you can have Koo's bag drop from the ceiling. Once you hop on Koo, head to the next part of the stage, go against this wind current here, fight Wayu, take his cutter ability, and then you'll be able to go into this door on the main path and destroy these cutter blocks to get your rainbow drop. Man, that sounds like a ton of fun and totally not convoluted in the slightest, doesn't it? Well, jokes aside, it is ridiculously convoluted. And the whole reason why this whole ridiculously convoluted sequence of events can occur is because there is an equally as convoluted setup. You are forced to use the ice ability to break these ice blocks here, which will force you to not have access to abilities like Cutter, which are vital for getting the rainbow drop. The ideas on display here are very good, but the whole sequence of events is just so convoluted and poorly put together that the whole thing just becomes a mindfuck rather than an actual coherent puzzle, in my opinion. And I left out the worst part. You know that secret room that you're forced to go down twice? It's in a blind jump, and you're supposed to bring Kind down there. Kind cannot fly, so I don't know why you'd just decide to jump down there of all places, but
I guess you're just expected to do that now. Kirby's Dreamland 2 moment indeed.
While Iceberg has my personal least favorite rainbow drop in the entire game due to how much hell it put me through, I will not deny that Cloudy Parks is just more poorly designed than that one. Iceberg at least had a clever idea behind it. This one is just a giant convoluted series of events. And that whole series of events is tied together with a blind jump that you literally have no idea is there, and you're forced to use the fucking fish in order to go against the currents inside the room. That is just ridiculous. If anybody can think of a more poorly designed collectible in a Kirby game, do let me know, but for now, I cannot think of anything worse than this. What a disaster. That was just a big mess, but thankfully, the Pekachow fight is miles above that. As a matter of fact, I'd probably give this one the bronze medal as far as the boss fights go in this game. This is the only fight to receive 2 health bars, and the first phase of the fight, which gets the first health bar, is against Pekachow Jr. He has a completely new pattern this time. He hides in the clouds, uses a beam attack, and then after that, he'll pop up out of the clouds and charge at you. You'll also be attacking him by using these little Pekachows, which I think are pretty cool. I like these guys a lot. They're just like these little mini Pekachows. But once Pekachow Jr. goes down, you'll fight the real deal, the big man Pekachow himself. He's also got tons of great attacks, including a multitude of new beam and lightning attacks, as well as different attacks where he'll send out Pekachows at you. And they're pretty easy to get like double star bullets on, so I think it's always pretty fun to just pierce him with one of those. It's a really, really solid fight, one of my favorites in the entire game, and I think it ends Cloudy Park on a pretty good note. And finally, Dark Castle. Ugh. Dark Castle has always been a really interesting area in the Kirby universe for me, not only because it has some of the most questionable level design in the series, which we'll talk about in a second, but because it's just this big, dark, evil castle on this colorful and peaceful archipelago. Is this just a natural part of the land? Has this always been here? Is there just an entire island dedicated to this single castle? I can neither confirm nor deny this, but I have heard a rumor that Dark Castle was created by Dark Matter in order to kind of give him a place to be so he wouldn't be so lonely, as well as kind of give Dedede a brand new crib in this game. This was all stated to have come from a Japanese Dreamland 2 guidebook, and I don't personally own one of those, nor could I find any scans online. So I do import from Japan like crazy. I'll see if I can import one of those in the future, but for now, I guess just keep it in the back of your mind. It could potentially be true, but there's no real confirmation yet. Take it with a grain of salt. That's definitely something interesting to think about. Well, I guess let's waste no time into raiding Dark Castle, and that's exactly what we do in Stage 1. It's kind of like a break-in. You're kind of on the outside of the castle. You need to get inside of it. It's a really cool section. I do like this one a fair bit. There's also an auto-scrolling section near the end. It's alright. It can be a little tight sometimes, but I do think it's pretty decent for what it is. In stages 2 and 3, you'll be inside the castle. There's an underwater section, a ridiculously easy way to nab 3-hole 1-ups. Like, seriously, this door isn't even hidden. And there's also an auto-scrolling section near the end of stage 3. Do pay attention to these little alcoves, though. I don't really know why these are here. They kind of look like dead ends, but you can't really access them, nor is it really worth it, so I don't know what's going on here. It's just weird. Oh, and also, you fight one of the game's 7 mid-bosses at the end of each of the 7 Dark Castle stages. It's kind of like a mid-boss tower, but if it were to be spread throughout an entire area, I don't really have a problem with it. It's just a more interesting take on a fairly common Kirby level design trope. Alright, so let's head into stage 4 now, and we're breaking back into Dark Castle. We're back outside. I think the level design progression of a castle area would be a little more clear-cut than this, but okay. The level design does feel a little familiar, though. Wait, is that an auto-scrolling section when we break into Dark Castle? Are you kidding me? This is just stage 1 but flipped around. And would you believe me if I said that that's not even the worst of it? Stages 5 and 6 are 2 and 3 flipped around respectively. That is just ridiculous. The fact that almost half this area is flipped around stages with different enemies and stuff plastered around them is just so shameless. And believe me, it gets worse. In stage 6, the auto-scrolling section, which was found in stage 3, has been flipped around. But this time, you're going to need to guess which ways are the right ways to go without getting squished in one of those little dead-end alcoves. Yes, believe it or not, those might have actually been important if the devs were planning to do this the whole time. I don't know why anyone would be paying much attention to those besides just looking at them and going like, oh, what's this for? That's interesting. The fact that they tried to do this, and the fact that this is literally the only way to actually get through this section without just guessing, besides like memorization and stuff, and the fact that your punishment is literally death, it's just horrible, horrible, horrible level design. So how exactly have we gotten to the point where the devs are recycling level layouts now? Well, I think it might be a cartridge space thing, or maybe it was a time thing and they wanted to make Dark Castle a little longer or something. I don't really know. But if that's the case, Don't try to pad the game out with useless filler like this. Just make the game as long as it should be, or like cut a stage from Cloudy Park and turn it into an original Dark Castle stage to make it a little longer. I don't know, just don't pad it out with stuff like this. Thankfully, Stage 7 is an original layout, but that doesn't leave it feeling any less anticlimactic. And anticlimactic is a good way to sum up Dark Castle, because even barring the stages that are just flipped around versions of other stages, they just feel short and like they're missing something. It just feels like there's a lot of enemies just randomly plastered everywhere in clusters. It just feels like it's missing something. It's just a really disappointing way for the game to go out, and it just feels like they were trying to meet a rainbow quota by having 7 worlds to represent each color in the rainbow. That's really what it feels like here, because Dark Castle really does show the team just grasping for straws, trying to come up with some way to make the game end, but in the end just creating the single worst area in Kirby history. This is where your rainbow drop is, and in order to get it, you need to bring Kine into the stage with you. Use Spark Kine in order to light up this dark room, and here you'll find a pattern of different abilities on the wall. The bulk of this stage has you going through all these doors which are blocked off by ability blocks, and if you only go through the doors which are blocked by the specific ability blocks which are shown on this wall, you'll be able to get your rainbow drop, and with that, we can go on to fight King DDD, the penultimate boss of the game. Right off the bat, I have to compliment this fight for setting a good atmosphere from the little pre-boss section at the start. You need to go up this short little tower where you can see these Shatzos from outside, and the only way to actually fit through this little gap here and fight King DDD is to drop the animal friend you may be carrying. I like this because it really does set the scene for an epic Kirby versus King DDD showdown. No animal friends attached. Also, the lack of music here really does add to the foreboding atmosphere. Like, you know shit's about to get serious when you climb up this tower. Now, as for the fight itself, well, DDD's seeming a little tired today. He'll only attack you every once in a while. He'll spend most of his time just sitting around and snoring, though. DDD does eventually lapse into some rage-filled bouts, and the attacks he sends out here are more plentiful and way more deadly. All sorts of explosions and little star projectiles you can't inhale are sent all over the place. It's just crazy stuff. It's my second favorite boss in the game. It's just a really, really solid DDD fight. After depleting his health bar and giving him a good old conk on the head, DDD falls to the ground and this strange dark figure seems to leave his body. Who exactly is this guy? Who knows and who really cares? Screw that, I just want to learn all the enemy names. Who is that guy floating in the sky there, though? I do wonder who he is. Yeah, if you don't collect all the rainbow drops, you get stuck with this bad ending. It's more of an enemy roll call than a proper ending. It's a cute little thing, and I think it does give you that necessary push to want to actually get all the rainbow drops until you learn that some of the rainbow drops are absolute torture to get, but still, that's besides the point. But during this playthrough, we did collect all the rainbow drops, and as a result of that, all the rainbow drops separate from Kirby in order to form the rainbow sword, which Kirby grabs onto as he sends himself into the darkened sky, ready to duel with the Dark Matter blade. Before we talk about the actual battle against Dark Matter, though, I do need to talk about the Rainbow Sword. Rainbow Sword sounds like a pretty powerful weapon, doesn't it? It's a sword made of rainbows. Dark Matter's only weakness. He hates rainbows. This could pierce him in an instant, but oh my god, this thing sucks so bad. But then again, I am the #1 world's biggest Rainbow Sword hater. But to briefly summarize why I think the Rainbow Sword is so bad, the range on this thing is just horrible. You need to get up super close in order to use it. Not like it's really worth doing, because it only does 0.2 damage. That is just ridiculously pathetic. That is like nothing. You absolutely need to make use of its reflecting abilities in order to do any damage against Dark Matter, but then in that case, you'll just be waiting for the enemy to attack you in order to do any damage. And also, don't even bother trying to hit Dark Matter during his second phase with this thing a lot of the time. The movements of that guy are just so erratic, you need to wait until he stands still to even get some reliable hits in. Not like the damage output is really that enticing. Are you trying to tell me that this is what I collected all these rainbow drops for? The Rainbow Sword is so lame that nobody even wanted to make official artwork for this thing. The most detailed shot we get of this thing is in this screen from the ending of Kirby's Dream Land 2, where you can see Kirby holding it up to the camera, and would you look at that? It's not even rainbow colored. To have a good Kirby final boss, you need a good final weapon most of the time. Take a look at Stardream from Planet Robobot. That fight is awesome, and one of the main reasons for that is the super fun Halberd Robobot armor mode you get for that fight. It's just a ton of fun to use. Or take a look at Zero and Zero 2 from Kirby's Dream Land 3 and 64. The final weapons in these games aren't like too impressive or anything, they're pretty restrictive in terms of what they can do, but the fights are designed around those weapons really well that it helps them stand out, among other things, but we'll talk about those later. For now, we need to talk about Dark Matter, and the quality of this fight is definitely hampered thanks to the Rainbow Sword being so garbage. I'll be honest, I do really like the first phase of the fight against Dark Matter Blade. I think he's got tons of really fun attacks, such as the charge move he has, as well as the move where he fires out a bunch of lasers across the sky. But I also really like his Dark Orb attack, which is the one you can reflect back at him. Not because you can reflect it back at him per se, but because if you manage to get close enough, you can actually do multiple points of damage to him with just one orb. This exploit really does make the fight a whole lot better. It speeds it up tremendously, and it also adds a little layer of skill to the fight. If you get a little too close while trying to land this hit, you'll actually just do a normal sword strike, and of course no one wants that. But exploit aside, I still think that this is a pretty good first phase. There's a ton of cool attacks here, and I do like how he can be a little easier to kind of land some sword strikes on. If you know when to get him in, they can add up pretty quickly. And then we get to the second phase, the fight with the true Dark Matter, and this is kind of where the fight starts to fall apart a little bit. As a kid, I absolutely hated this phase of the fight. I thought this was like impossible. The amount of lives this guy ate up was ridiculous. It took me forever to beat this guy. The thing that made this fight so hair-tearingly difficult for me as a kid was that if you stayed fighting the true Dark Matter phase for a little too long, you'd go down into Popstar's atmosphere, where you would take gradual damage over time. I still remember the first time I found out that this was a thing during this fight as a kid, and it just sent me insane. Every single time after that I would fight this guy, I would just try to brute force my way through him, and it never ended well, except for the few times I did actually manage to beat him. The reason why using this playstyle is super difficult though is Dark Matter's crazy amount of different attacks. He's got eye lasers, which can be super difficult to predict if you don't already know where they're gonna come out. He's got charge attacks. He just moves around super erratically. And the only attack you can send back at him are these little orbs, and if you try to slash them back regularly by facing him directly in the eye, sometimes you won't wind up hitting them all back, so it can be pretty difficult to do some good damage. Also, another drawback with the brute force playstyle is that when you inevitably get a game over, you have to go fight DDD again, and trust me, as a kid, I was fighting DDD a lot. I had to fight this guy over the course of multiple days. This playstyle is that difficult to actually defeat him with. During this playthrough though, I did discover a little exploit for this fight as well. When Dark Matter inevitably locks his eye in one direction and sends out his little orbs behind him, if you quickly move behind him before the orbs move, you can actually just slice them back at him and deal a whole 4 points of damage off his health bar. It felt so cathartic to actually find an easy way to defeat Dark Matter after putting up with his bullshit for so long, and this discovery was just so crazy to me. I couldn't believe that a way to defeat him was this easy and this obvious. But as satisfying as this discovery was though, I do kind of wish I hadn't discovered it because the undisputed king of difficult Kirby bosses has kind of been dethroned for me, and now I don't know who to really give that crown to. I've slayed Stardream, Soul OS, and Void so many times it's not even funny. You know that double Chaos Elfless exploit you can do in Forgotten Land? You're the hardest Kirby boss now. Here's your crown. Take it. Have fun. But anyway, Kirby has defeated Dark Matter once and for all, or so it seems, so he heads back down to Planet Popstar to put the rainbow back in Rainbow Islands in a beautifully made cutscene with some beautiful sprite work and a beautiful track playing in the background. I love the wielder of the Rainbow Sword track so much. It may not be big for us, but it's still very good. And with that, wait, 93%? Guys, we're going back in. Let's see what we missed. I bet most of you noticed that I was skipping out on something during our playthrough of Kirby's Dream 1 2, and that thing is the bonus chance games, those little mini games you can access if you go into the boss store after already defeating them. For those of you who are uninformed though, you might be wondering how exactly these bonus chance games work, and the gist of these is that you'll be put back into the boss arena. Sometimes you'll be standing up against the boss directly, other times you'll simply just be dealing with hazards that you saw during their fight, but your main goal here is to avoid all these hazards and collect the 14 point stars which will appear throughout the game. 14 point stars is equal to 2 whole lives, so there is a reward beyond 100% completion for playing these perfectly. Another interesting thing about these is that if you mess up the bonus chance game, the door will be locked, but if you simply just reset the game, you'll be able to just enter your save file and then go back inside the bonus chance door to give it another shot. To very quickly cover all the bonus chance games, Wispy Woods has you facing Wispy Woods directly. He'll spit out apples and point stars, and you just need to be a little mindful of what he's spitting out. It's pretty easy, a nice introductory bonus chance game, but it's nothing too impressive. Ruffin Nellies forces you to move between all 3 different platform elevations, all while weaving between all the Nellies and trying to nab the point stars, both of which come from these little holes on the sides of the screen. It's pretty fun when things go smoothly, although it's not impossible to get a pretty bad scenario going on here, which is never fun, but if there's one I think is almost always fun, it's gotta be Sweet Stuffs. Once again, Sweet Stuff delivers an excellent experience. You have to weave through Gordos in this one in order to nab all the point stars, and I think it's done excellently here. Kirby's slippery underwater movement can be a little tricky to get used to at first, but once you kind of adapt to that, you can really start finding the fun and trying to use it to go between all these Gordos. It's just a really, really fun game. I just enjoy it every time I play it. It's so fun. Ice Dragons is alright. You gotta dodge all the icicles that drop from the ceiling, much like how they did in the fight, while also trying to get the point stars, which will also drop down from the ceiling. You have to be a little careful of the icicles when they break apart though, but other than that, it's like probably the easiest one in the game besides Wispy Woods. And then there's Mr. Shine and Mr. Bright, and I think this one is easily the most hit or miss depending on how things play out. This one has you once again collecting point stars, although you need to be careful of Mr. Bright, who occupies the top of the screen firing down his sun rays occasionally, and Mr. Shine, who takes ground control, rolling around, and yeah, sometimes you could get a really, really fun pattern going on with these guys. It feels pretty fun to kind of get in a good rhythm with them, but when they're not in a good rhythm, things can easily go bad. You can be trapped in some pretty difficult scenarios, and yeah, it's a pretty hit or miss one, like I said. Krakos is also a little hit or miss. There's these little spots on the ground where Krakos or stars will pop out, and you need to kind of be careful. Just sit around and wait for something to happen, see what it is, and then go and act on it. If a point star is on the other side of the screen, though, and you're like on the opposite side of the screen, then things can go pretty bad. I'm not exactly sure if there's a way to even get this. I don't know if it's like even possible. But other than that, I think this one is solid. And that's all 6 of the different bonus chance games, and I think for what they are pretty fun. Sure, they rely a little too heavily on RNG sometimes, like seriously, some of these can just go completely south if you have bad RNG, and you're better off just resetting the game than even finishing that attempt. But when you get into a good pattern with some of them, or just are just playing certain ones naturally, it can really be a good and fun time. I do appreciate their existence. So with all of those done, Kirby's Dream Land 2 has officially been 99%ed. What the hell am I missing? Well, remember Gooey, the little guy who shows up in bags if you're already riding an animal friend that would have popped out otherwise? He restores your health and stuff. Well, he's got a gender-swapped counterpart in this game, and she is known simply as the Girl Blob.
Also, the Girl Blob is objectively the hottest Kirby character. Look at this malleable body. Tell me you couldn't just morph this into whatever you want.
She has a 1 in 8 chance of appearing in bags Gooey would come out of otherwise, and she also manages to give you a 1-up rather than just restoring a little bit of your health. And another interesting fact surrounding the Girl Blob is that she was a character made for the sake of localization, because in the original Japanese version of Kirby's Dream Land 2, her role is fulfilled by the character Chow from the hit game Yu Yuki. You know that iconic Famicom game we all played, you know, one of the most important games of all time. Well, back to Red Canyon Stage 3, I guess.
If you Gooey's late there.
Oh, hey, look, it's the Girl Blob. That's cool. Now we have that final 1% for our save file, and check this out. Man, that looks so clean. We also get a few additional bonus modes for our troubles. There's 3 modes you get specifically. The first one is simply just a sound test. You get a cute little picture here. The Girl Blob is even featured in it, and yeah, in the Japanese version, it also looks different. There's Chow right there. The most interesting thing about this sound test, though, is that it actually contains an unused track. It's a little frantic, and you might recognize it as Cave in the Sky from Kirby Triple Deluxe because, yes, they did cut that deep looking for a song to remix. We also unlock 2 different gauntlet modes, with the first one being a boss rush, which can be pretty tricky considering the fact that you only have 6 HP and cannot heal or use any copy abilities. So yeah, it's definitely a little difficult, but it does pay off to beat it in the end. It does feel pretty satisfying. We also get a little bonus chance mode, although I'm not too big of a fan of this one considering that some of these can be pretty RNG dependent. So just a single bad round on some of these can really ruin an entire run. So with all that said, we have officially completed Kirby's Dream Land 2. So let's go see the final verdict. Kirby's Dream Land 2 really is one of the games of all time, and this recent playthrough I did for this video didn't really help sway my opinion either way. Now, I cannot stress this enough, I do think Kirby's Dream Land 2 is a good game. I can play this one and have fun with it, but in the sea of mainline Kirby games, Dream Land 2 definitely sticks out like a sore thumb. For all of its positive aspects, like some occasionally amazing standout stages, its solid selection of bosses and bonus content, and of course the animal friends and literally just everything about them, it also has its fair share of negative drawbacks that really do weigh down the game. Some stages tend to blend together, and while that isn't really a super big problem if I'm having fun, the best
of the best Kirby games usually tend to have stages that stick out just a little bit more.
The rainbow drops are just bad collectibles. When they're not mind-numbingly easy to get, like seriously, look at this. This requires like no thought or skill whatsoever. They are ridiculously cryptic and just a chore to collect. Some of these are really poorly thought out, and there is nothing satisfying about getting through their BS just to collect them. Sure, there's a handful of decent ones, but once you consider that there's only 7 in the game, yeah, that track record ain't looking too good. Kirby games are usually more fun on a 100% completionist playthrough, and I think that's the way things should be, barring things like keychain and sticker grinding, of course, but still, you get what I'm saying. The main collectibles of the games are usually pretty fun to pick up. So when Dreamland 2 winds up being more fun on a casual playthrough than a completionist one, why should I really bother collecting the rainbow drops? Is it worth collecting most of these poorly conceived collectibles in order to fight a pretty unremarkable final boss? Yeah, I didn't think so, and it's especially bad considering that Kirby's Dream Land 2 hides its true ending behind a 100% completion wall, meaning you're gonna have to do this if you want to get the full story. This is something that really does a number on the game to me, because I always love doing 100% runs of Kirby games. It's simply just more fun that way. So when Kirby's Dream Land 2 turns something that should be fun into a chore, then we're gonna have issues, and I just feel motivated to play the casual playthrough, which just leaves me feeling just so dirty not collecting everything. And speaking of 100%, love you girl Blob, but you are the single most cryptic 100% completion requirement in the entire series. I don't think anyone just thought, oh, I'm stuck at 99%, better go open up some gooey bags, maybe some unique gooey variant will pop out. No one thought that. I don't know how this even came to be. It's random, it's funny, the girl Blob is the hottest Kirby character of all time, best girl, but like, this is just ridiculous. I don't even know what to say about this. I can only imagine the amount of people who are just stuck at 99%, not even knowing of her existence. It definitely makes 100% in Kirby's Dream Land 2 a little more of a chore when you need to go out and grind for the girl Blob, but I guess the drop rate isn't too bad. 1 in 6 could have been, I don't know, 1 in 16 or something. That would have been horrible. And I just want to specify, there's nothing wrong with a Kirby game being a little more tricky to 100%. I just think Dreamland 2 does it in a more tedious and cryptic way than a game like Dreamland 3, which is more straightforward and actually has some legitimate challenge to it rather than just being super cryptic and weird. Regardless of the difficulty, if getting 100% completion is satisfying or fun, then that's exactly what I want. I just want to have fun. But when it's not, then we have an issue. And that's kind of where Kirby's Dream Land 2's completionist run fails. And Dark Castle is just the worst thing to have ever come from this series besides gem-apple microtransactions, but that's really telling of how bad Dark Castle truly is. The level design here is just so lazy and so poorly conceived that I would take fucking Pie Ribbit over it. It's that bad.
And while the game's presentation's far from bad, I just think it's pretty standard.
Yeah, I know it's a Game Boy game, cut out a little bit of slack, I am, trust me, but it just doesn't really wow me the way a lot of other Kirby games do, and due to its presentation just being consistently good all over the board, it just kinda is there. It doesn't really help or hinder the overall score of the game. And that's really the main reason why I'm so hard on Dreamland 2. It's a mainline Kirby title, but most of the other mainline Kirby titles avoid falling into this trap. It's a really, really consistent series of games. Dreamland 2 doesn't really stand out as great though, it's just a good Kirby game. I would take the original Kirby's Dreamland over this, and yeah, sure, I'm biased. It was my first ever game, I'm acknowledging that. But still, I do think the original Kirby's Dreamland does what it does better. Kirby's Dreamland doesn't really have too many flaws you can blame on the game. Sure, things like copy abilities aren't present, but then again, copy abilities were not even thought of at this point. This is a Kirby game before copy abilities were even conceived. And sure, the game's short, but it was intended to be a game for beginners, and it also has an additional spicy extra mode to kind of give more experienced players the difficulty they desire.
And while the presentation here isn't technically as good as Dreamland 2, there's something that's just so charming and alluring about going through this super early version of Dreamland.
Dreamland 2, though, has tons of inherent flaws with the way it's structured. There's annoying rainbow drops, Dark Castle, just a whole slew of things that really do hold the game back despite it having all sorts of amazing ideas in it, like the Animal Friends. And that's the thing right there. It is a great, fully realized Kirby title with amazing innovations like the Animal Friends, but for what Dreamland 2 is, it is an extremely flawed game. Sure, it's a little rough around the edges and nowhere near up to par with the rest of the mainline Kirby titles, but I do think that it is still a very good game, and it's worth checking out if you love Kirby. Sure, I'm a little hard on the game sometimes, but at the end of the day, I do really like this game. And of course, I cannot give it enough credit for paving the way for Kirby's Dreamland 3 and 64, which would go on to continue this basic gameplay formula along with the storyline and just expand it into something amazing. Dreamland 3 especially takes what Kirby's Dreamland 2 did and just does it 10 times better, bringing back the animal friends and all that. But that's a topic for another video, and one that shouldn't be coming too far in the future. Just give it a couple months.
But if Dreamland 2 happens to be your favorite Kirby game of all time, even if I think you're a little insane, there's nothing wrong with that. Nobody likes to be hated by the population, including Kirby's Dreamland 2. So if you liked the video, leave a like. If you didn't, leave a dislike. And if you want more content like this, be sure to subscribe. Also, I have a Twitter. The link is in the description.
And with that, we have finished part 1 of my Dark Matter Trilogy Retrospective series by going over its rough beginnings with Kirby's Dreamland 2. But from here on out, things can only get just a ton better, and I am super excited to cover these next 2 games. These are some of my favorite Kirby games of all time, and I'm so hyped to finally do these games justice. And so, with all that said, Pekachow out!